Jon Moxley gave an interview to Sports Illustrated on the heels of two very bloody matches he had in Japan this week, talking about his theory on the use of blood in pro wrestling, feeling that it adds realism to the matches. This is what he had to say. I have a whole dissertation on my theory about blood in modern wrestling. This is a combat sport. College wrestling is a combat sport too. They have blood timeouts to patch things up. The lowest prelim bout of a UFC card or a boxing card, somebody might have a little blood on their eyebrow or blood coming out of their nose. But they're not selling a blood sport. It's not. Tune in for the blood. Tune in for the gore. It's part of the aesthetic. It adds realism. He also said he has so much scar tissue on his eyebrows and his head that he cuts very easily. And he said, sometimes when I don't even want to, I bleed. But I only know one speed. That's with my foot to the gas pedal. If we're going to go do something, let's fucking do it. That can be detrimental when it comes to negative things like drugs or alcohol. But that's my mindset. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. When it comes to blood, it's just going to happen sometimes. Like I said, it's foot to the gas pedal. Some people say this is just a random match. Why is there blood? I heard that last week against Tomohiro Ishii. He's one of the greatest of all time. I'm not going to let that moment slip by. I'm going foot to the fucking gas pedal. How can I not? Then I hear that I can't have a good match without blood. Okay then, you made my argument for me. I'll do it every time. So he's doubling down on the blood. He's going to bleed more because he knows it pisses people off. But he continued, the point of the dissertation is that this is a combat sport, but we're not allowed to have blood in a match unless it's a personal grudge. We're only allowed to have blood after a 5-month grudge after someone slept with somebody's wife or somebody ran over someone with their car. And then and only then are we allowed to have this dramatic crimson mask that looks the exact same way every single time, clearly taking a shot at WWE here. For me, realism-wise, since this is a combat sport, that means there is the potential for blood in every match. Everything in wrestling is preposterous to some degree, but this helps with the suspension of disbelief. I'm actually for less blood, but more often. If every single match on the card had a busted eyebrow or a bloody nose, it would just be part of the sport. But some gory spectacle with blood shooting like a hose is pretty unnecessary. We're elbowing each other in the face every single match. We're kicking each other in the face every single match. What are these people made of if they're not bleeding? People ask why there is blood in the ring every time I leave it. It feels unnatural to go out of my way to make sure no one is bleeding. That feels like I am taking my foot off the gas pedal. That doesn't interest me. I get what and there's going to be a lot of divided opinion about this. I get what he's saying. There is some merit to some of the things that he is saying as far as does having blood add to the realism of it? Yes. Yes. And if you want to really drill it down to common sense, if you're someone who isn't a wrestling fan and you're watching this and you're seeing people with closed fists punching somebody in the face, then the obvious question is, well, how come this person doesn't have a black eye? Or how come this person isn't bleeding? Right? I mean, but that's part of the suspension of disbelief in professional wrestling. It's been that way for decades. But yes, does it add realism? It does add realism. I am of the mindset, and it's interesting that he said he's for less blood, but more often. So he's saying that to add to the realism of it, he thinks there should be blood basically in every single match. Because we have punches and forearms and elbows and kicks being thrown in every match. Why would some have blood and some wouldn't? So by Jon Moxley's logic, every single match, even if it's only a trace amount, should have some blood in it. Matt Hardy made a comment, because I think Matt Hardy was asked about this too. He said that blood does not need to be done too often because that will kind of kill it. It hurts the effects as well. When blood happens in certain scenarios, it means so much more. I'm in the Matt Hardy camp on this. I feel like you're in one of two camps. You're in that camp, or you're in the Jon Moxley camp, or actually there's 3 camps. The third camp is you're not a fan of blood in wrestling at all. And there are people who don't want to see any blood in wrestling for various reasons, for health reasons, and just because they think it's completely unnecessary in 2023 that these people who are out there performing have to cut themselves. And so there's actually 3 camps here that people will fall into. When I see something, I'll use Brock Lesnar as an example. Brock Lesnar, in his match with Cody Rhodes at Backlash, their first match that they had, Brock Lesnar was pouring blood, right? He smashed his own head into the exposed buckle. He didn't blade, he didn't cut himself. He cut himself, but he did it the hard way, and he busted himself open. And there is part of me that has a lot of respect for somebody willing to do that for the sake of the art, for the sake of the match and putting their opponent over. But I also think it's fucking stupid to ram your head that hard that you would. I mean, he had a huge gash in between his eyes. To do something like that is incredibly stupid for a whole host of different reasons, not the least of which is concussions and all of that type of stuff, brain damage. But when Brock Lesnar gets blood like that, when we don't see him bleeding very often, it does feel special. It feels like, oh my God, Brock is bleeding. I mean, normally we see Brock in the ring with other people who are bleeding, but in this case, Brock is bleeding, right? And there's blood all over the canvas, and it felt special because it's something that we don't get to see very often. Brock Lesnar went into a SummerSlam match years ago with Randy Orton, where only a few people knew what the plan was going into the match. So few that after it happened, Chris Jericho tried to fight Brock in the back, which would not have ended well for Chris Jericho. But that's when Brock Lesnar used the point of his elbow to open up Randy Orton Hardway. And Randy Orton was bleeding all over the place. And I remember watching that and I'm thinking, that is so stupid. First of all, agreeing to that is stupid. Doing it is stupid. Coming up with the idea to do that is stupid. It would actually be better to blade. And blading, the act of blading sounds like such a savage, barbaric thing. But there are safe ways to do that. It's a hell of a lot safer to take a blade if you know what you're doing and cut yourself on your hairline or the forehead than have Brock Lesnar, a former UFC champion, mounting you in the middle of the ring and as hard as he possibly can, trying to open you up legit with the point of his elbow. That's just fucking stupid. So there's a lot of ways to use blood in wrestling. That is one that I personally, I can't condone that. I just think that's stupid. And you can say, oh, it makes them tough. And yeah, well, you know what? Maybe so, but it's still fucking dumb. I can't support that. But I'm in the Matt Hardy camp of a little bit of blood can go a long way. When I say a little bit of blood, I mean not doing it very often. There might be a lot of blood in a given match, but you're not doing it all the time. And this has been one of my issues with AEW. I disagree with Moxley on this. I'm at the point now where I'm just desensitized to it. Having blood in a match doesn't mean anything. And maybe that's what Moxley is going for. It may be in Jon Moxley's mind, based on what he said here, that should be the norm, where people, it doesn't come off as something gratuitous. And it's just like, oh, shit, this person got opened up. Okay. He wanted to just be a normal, everyday part of pro wrestling. I disagree. As a fan watching, I think it's more impactful when time goes by, weeks go by, whatever it is, and we don't get to see blood, and then we have that one match where these two guys are going after each other. They want at each other in the worst way. Maybe it's a cage match or some kind of weapons match. We see so many of those. And there's one guy in there, oh shit, man, he's bleeding like a stuck pig, right? To me, that is more meaningful and more impactful. That's what Matt Hardy is saying in the comment that he made. I'm more in the Matt Hardy camp. I'm okay with blood in wrestling in limited doses as long as it means something and it adds something to the match. If you're going to have a steel cage match in wrestling, if you're going to have a Hell in a Cell match in wrestling, if you're going to have a War Games match in wrestling, it's pretty stupid not to have blood in a match like that. Especially when if you're taking somebody's face and they do the whole cheese grater spot where they're raking their face across the chain link fence and nobody bleeds, right? It is kind of goofy. I would save blood for situations like that. If you do a big injury angle, you got to write somebody off of television. You're doing a major injury angle here, right? Really savage beatdown. That's where blood can be effective. So I disagree that we should just be seeing blood in every match because it stretches the bounds of credibility. That's part of the suspension of disbelief in pro wrestling. To the point where if you're an everyday fan, if you're watching wrestling, you're not thinking about that anymore. I've been watching wrestling for well over 30 years. I don't go into the shows every week and say, how come this guy didn't bleed? And how come that guy didn't bleed? That's not real. That's not real. Yeah, I just got done watching a fucking Mountain Dew pitch black match at the Royal Rumble a few months ago. Guess what? I know wrestling is not real. Okay, I know these matches. I know it's all part of the show. I don't spend my time wondering why everybody isn't bleeding in all these matches. What I spend my time thinking about when I watch AEW is, why is every fucking person on this roster bloody? Why does Dustin Rhodes go out there and bleed every single match? It could be a random match on Rampage. And Dustin doesn't just get a little bit of blood, his whole face is covered in it. A match that nobody is going to be thinking about a week later. Jon Moxley, yes, to the point of parody with him at this point. I'm shocked when he doesn't bleed. We have a match called Blood and Guts coming up next week, right? I expect there to be a lot of blood in that match. The word blood is in the title of the match, so I expect it. To me, though, it's not going to mean as much because every week in AEW is Blood and Guts. Why even have a Blood and Guts match? Or at least, get the 2 rings in the cage. Call it something else. Why call it Blood and Guts? We have blood every single week. It loses its appeal if you do that. This is not UFC. Jon Moxley is thinking about this. This is a combat sport. No, it's not. It's a contact sport. People are throwing arms and legs. People get hurt. They get a busted lip. They get a black eye. They get bruises. People get hurt. For real in pro wrestling. I don't look at it as a combat sport. I know some of these guys like to think of it that way. I feel like some of them want to be a UFC fighter. They want to be a boxer. Well, then go box. Go talk to Dana White. Go train to be a fighter. It's not UFC. I mean, think about the Bret Hart-Steve Austin match at WrestleMania 13. That moment where Austin is locked in the sharpshooter and the blood is pouring down his face. Iconic shot of Austin bleeding in the sharpshooter. It's part of the lore and the legend of that match. Okay, now imagine if every match on the card leading up to Bret Hart and Steve Austin that night in Chicago had blood. Every other match on the card, the Sultan against The Rock, Rocky Maivia, had blood. Every match on that card had blood leading up to Austin and Bret. It would not have meant as much. That's my point. So I understand what Moxley is saying. I disagree with his take on that, but that at least he's offering his thought process as to why we always see Jon Moxley bleeding in his match, other than the fact that apparently he's like Ric Flair and he has fucking tissue paper for a forehead and he may bleed anyway even when he doesn't want to. But at least he let us in on the thought process behind why he bleeds so much on television. But I think it actually is a negative thing when it comes to AEW, that we have so much blood in so many matches to the point where it don't mean shit.